Hello, my lovey, and welcome to yet another episode of the riveting ZFG Living Podcast! Exclamation point. Today, I am here with Monte Cox, who is an all-around fantastic person, an excellent coach, and what do you know, a fellow trauma survivor like myself. And we are going to get all into the trauma. Welcome, Monte.
Hey, love, how are you doing today?
So fabulous. I'm so glad you're here. This is very fun.
Me too.
Well, not that I'm making light of trauma. Trauma is not fun, but it is fun for us to get down to the roots and the nitty gritty and to recognize that we don't have to exist in that space. And what is trauma anyway? I know, my lovey listener, you're wondering. Well, I'll tell you. Trauma is just about any fuckery and shenanigan that we get stuck in and that we don't have a way to process, integrate, and move through so that when things happen, this would be like when you're triggered, then you're reacting to stuff that happened in the past. You're not reacting to what the here and now is doing, and you're perceiving your world through layers of your trauma. And that makes just muddling through everyday living kind of a pain in the tuchus. So, Monte, tell me some of your wisdom. Drop some pearls before this swine, baby.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I want to expand on the trauma definition because I study with Gabor Mate, who really looks at trauma and addiction. And his definition of trauma is not the thing that happened, it's what happened inside of you because of the thing that happened. And so there's two different types of trauma, and there's trauma, they call it, like in psycho world, they call it trauma with a big T, trauma with a little t. And so trauma with a little t is probably what people might necessarily think of. They might think of growing up in an alcoholic household, sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, those sort of things. Those are more like what we would call the big T. Small t would be things that you may not be thinking about, unless you really study this and goes deep into it. And so like a smaller traumas are, like when you're crying, a lot of them happen in our society as we're taught to raise children.
Yes,
And
I
so
was going to bring up the crying it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some debate about this, but we sleep train children now. And so what people are taught to do is let the child cry. So babies have no way to regulate their own emotions or how they're feeling. And so when a baby is crying, it wants something. And so in old traditional, like Aboriginal tribes and things like that, you pick up the baby. The baby is crying, you pick up the baby, and that's just what you do. And there's also many parents, in those kind of cultures. So it's not like, you're dying and you can't ever sleep. There's help. And so that way the child, like, you understand as a child, like it goes into the subconscious. Like when you're not being picked up, it's like, oh, I can't get my needs met. Oh, right. You know what I mean? And so there's small things like that. There's also, like, if your parent is very stressed out, maybe going through divorce, maybe they have a mental illness and they can't give you the loving and caring that you need. Like what you learn to do is function in a way that, because as a child, like, I'm not going to survive without this person loving me, taking care of me. Right. So then you start to adapt behaviors to please them. So that's how people can become a people pleaser. That's how you can not speak up your needs, why it can become very difficult for people to speak their needs, because they were taught that their needs were not going to be met. Like, not all of their needs, right. Like if you want to get fed and like not get hit or, get some kind of love, and your child, like your parent was more like a child raising a child, then you had to do certain things. And right.
And that's when you get into like the generational work that just keeps passing down and down and down.
Yeah. So this is it's something that I think is really once you, my experience, and I think some people's experiences, and once you realize that, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so huge. How will I ever get through it? Or where do I even start?
It does seem relentless and overwhelming, I think, sometimes, especially when you realize that, well, what if I don't even remember what it is? What if it's from sleep training? What if it's from, a birth that was going wrong and needed medical intervention? Or, we fundamentally absorb some of these things. And when we're adults and we're not having that rational, ordered, emotionally healthy response to things, and life is so painful that we want to find ways to escape, which could be shopping, which could be sex, which could be, alcohol, drugs. I mean, pick something that gives you a little dopamine rush and you can abuse the F out of it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I really think that everything is addiction. I mean, that's just how I look at it. Addiction and malbehavior based upon, traumas that you're not aware of. And so at first, I think my experience and a lot of people is I had so much trauma to get over, and I'm still working it out and I still get afraid and all the things, but
Mhm.
it's such a different level. Like there was like a time when I started a spiritual journey, when I really started working on myself, when I got into coaching, all of the things, went through personal development, leadership training, all of the things. And like at first it was like I was a big raw open wound and
Mhm.
completely unable to regulate myself. And so what I want to let people know, it's like if I can do it and find peace, literally anybody can do it because
Mhm.
I suffered very, very, very deeply. And so I really understand that what it's like to feel that. So the number one thing I think in anything, it's like is to know, like I always say to people, it's not your fault, but now it is your responsibility. So
Yes,
we
100%.
like we get to like there's a lot of times there's a lot of mourning, there's a lot of grief around what could have been, what should have been. There's grief around what did happen, which maybe it
Mhm.
was like straight up abuse or neglect or things like that. And then there's also grief around what should have happened. You know what I mean? You've seen other
Mhm.
people have a loving parent. You've seen other people get to go on a vacation when they're young. You've seen other people, maybe, depending on what your situation is, that had food all the time, that felt safe all the time. You know what I mean? And so there's a grief of like, I never had that. And then there's a letting go of the brokenness, deciding I'm not
Mhm.
broken. Because you are 100% fixable, or however you want to say it. Like there is
Yes.
I know it because I mean I have been suicidal. I have a suicide attempt in my past. I mean really have gone through it, and it's taken a lot more than I hope it takes for other people.
And let me interject there because when we look at our own journey and when we know what's going on, first of all, we have the backstory. We know all the deets. Second of all, you look at this other, whether it's another person, family, whomever it is that you're seeing this example of the well fed, happy, carefree, vacationing, wonderful family that, has this happiness. That's a myth. And the sooner we can disabuse ourselves of that kind of claptrap, the better off we all are. Because, for one thing, you never know what's going on in someone else's household. You absolutely have no idea. Because I grew up in a household where, everyone thought that my mother was this absolute saint, amazing paragon of, what maternity should be. And it was a hellhole.
Mm,
So I am so, so resistant to thinking that other people have this wonderful, wonderful life when, you are the ones suffering because you just have no effing clue. Because guess what? At
yeah.
the very minimum, probably what percentage of people were sleep trained? So like puff puff give, you just ignore your kid wailing their eyes out. I'm the second of 9 kids. I would just basically crash with an arm up in a crib, just so that they could be touching another human being. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Because I just thought that was wrong.
Yeah, well, and what you make a strong point because we're, of a different generation where there wasn't social media back then, but you still saw people at school and you still had opinions. And now I think it's even heightened because, most people are putting their best foot forward, like
100%.
when I'm on the couch, like, with a pint of ice cream and just like crying or whatever my situation is, I'm not posting, and most people aren't. So it
Yeah.
can be even more distorted. And
And especially because as humans, our first instinct is to see the most negative thing, the most
Mhm.
negative perception of whatever is happening. That's where our brain's going to go, which
Yeah.
kept us evolutionarily alive to have children, and yet does not serve us 99% of the time.
Yeah, another thing that happens is, people think that they have like a good childhood, and some people, I mean, there's lots of good things, right? I
Mhm.
mean, somebody maybe did have relatively, but when you dig into it, almost everybody has some sort of maladaptive behavior for like, because it's easy to look, like say I did grow up in this great household that my dad wasn't a drug dealer and I did, you know what I mean? Like my parents didn't
Mm-hmm.
get all these things. And then I see all the other things that are happening in the world. I might think, wow, I'm so lucky. I'm so, you know what I mean? And I have nothing to like complain about. And it's not about like complaining, but it's just about noticing like, well, where did, like I was watching, so I was doing a training recently with Gabor Mate, and I was watching
Mm-hmm.
something came up and he had like, Gabor's looking for like, the myth of the happy childhood. Just one guy, nothing bad happened, never hid. There was always food, like, like it felt like his parents loved him, things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
digging a little bit deeper, there was, they found out that the mother had been in love with somebody that died and then never loved her, married the father, never loved the father, and so you feel that, you know what I mean? There's some
Mm-hmm.
kind of that. And eventually, like, because all this stuff happened later, like dad started drinking, they got divorced. It all happened later. But the truth is that there was something going on the entire time,
Mm-hmm.
And so it may not look like, the biggest thing on the world, the planet, but there might be something that happened for you that is still significant. It is still changing how you're able to show up for yourself and in the world. And
Yeah. And so that what that is, you're putting together your blueprint of what living is, of what home is, right? And this is just literally where you feel home.
mm-hmm,
And if that's with those parents specifically that are mentioned, that you just mentioned, then there's not connection.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so then you are lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And so then but that's what you see is how life is. That's how life should be. That's how it was when that's how I grew up.
Yeah. Well, then it
And
turned out, because the mother was never in a thrilled mood. He became a people pleaser. You know what I mean? He's doing the song and dance to get the love, and things like that. And then he takes it into other relationships.
oh, oh
And it's not
yeah.
the most major thing on earth, right? But it's not letting him live his like happiest, most optimal life.
Or
And
even I would say an authentic life with connection.
true, true.
So I mean, it seems like, well, he was safe, he was, fed, he was cared for, all of those things happened, but without seeing that that connection was possible. What is he picking up garbage from cinema and you know what I mean? Like all the stuff we're
The
bombarded
fairy
with.
tale romance.
Oh, yay. That's how you work things out.
It all ends like this.
And then what, they die? I never understood that. Like then what happens the day after the ball?
Yeah. So, these are like big topics and, they're big self-discoveries or things to work with people like us, with therapists. And I think the one thing that I really want, like, I just always want people to know it's okay. Like, you're okay, and whatever, you get to give yourself time to, like, when you're trying to repattern yourself,
Hmm.
like say, if I find something, like I really started, I mean, I've been working on myself for about 20 years, but it got super deep about 6 or 7 years ago,
Hmm.
hit a new level. And I really like, it was a lot of work, but it, like my experience is like, you can realize something about yourself and then you still keep doing it,
Yes.
it can feel very frustrating. It can feel very hopeless. And so I just want to normalize that for anybody, that
Hmm.
might listen to what we're saying and being like, yeah, and I'm still doing it. Like I've known that for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Self-compassion, self-love, self-compassion and self-love, number one. You get to start with yourself. Another thing that I think makes people hold on is blame, blaming your parents, right?
Mm.
Where you get to look at, like, sure, nothing was, I'm not condoning any kind of behavior, bad behavior, lower, big T, lower T, none of that kind of stuff. But it all comes from somewhere, right? Like,
Right.
and that's talking about the generational, you're looking back. And so you get to like, nobody, like nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to mess with my kid's psyche today. What could I do? Oh,
Exactly.
I know what, like that's not happening. People are doing the absolute best that they can, like within my family, with my father, it was very upset, when he, at some point he realized, giving your kid drugs at 15 probably is not the move, right? Also seeing how, the damage that it caused in my life, we went through a thing where I was like, Dad, you get to let it go. You did the
Yeah.
best you could. And it's now for me to break that cycle and to break that trauma. And you also get to break it within yourself. You know what I mean? Like you can't
Exactly.
undo what's happened, but you get to forgive yourself for being raised the way you were, you know? And it
100%.
and that took time for him. Like, I don't know how he truly feels inside about it now, but I know that like he used to cry a lot. You know what I mean? When we would
Mhm.
talk or just be very upset, you know? And it took a long time for him. For me, like changing behavior, not going into fear. Like now I'm at a place where I can have the old fear thoughts that I used to have. And I'm like, oh, there you are. Okay, got it.
Right.
um like what am I going to do right now? And I have tools, like and letting it be okay. It's like, sure, I was like that for, I'm 51 years old, for however many years, wherever I picked that up along the way. Let's say minimum 40 years I've been like that. you
Mhm.
know it's not going to naturally just change. I mean, there's a few people on earth where it does seem to change like that. It's very rare.
Good
but
for
it
them.
but for yes, and God bless you, I'm so happy. Most of us
Right, right. We're
have a
left forcing it. Yeah.
yeah, we have a process ahead of us. And so, that self-compassion and self-compassion and grieving, and then
Mhm.
patience. You get to be patient as you continually like, oh, I'm doing that thing again. Okay.
R Yes.
You for the trigger, like what happened? Like, is it looking the same? Is it looking a little bit different? Like, where am I with it? And looking for ways like, what can I do next time?
And
Like
that's
maybe
that's really
stop.
powerful. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we can also be very compassionate to that young person to whom this happened, right? Because you're not
Mhm.
dealing with something that happened today, you're dealing with stuff that happened in the past. And it's younger you, and look at them as if you are your higher self and just love them and
Yeah.
console them. And the therapy, like the therapeutic value of being able to minister to yourself is just astronomically amazing, because when you can give that person bereft with loneliness, with rage, with, railing against the injustice of what's happened and why it continues to happen, or, my life is dark and this and that because of that happening, then being able to let it go. Because when they say forgiveness is for us, holy, yeah. Because I mean, who cares about the mofo that like did all the bad stuff? Like,
Yeah.
they can jack all, do whatever. But when we can allow ourselves to let it go,
Yeah. Well,
all
I
the
think,
effort of holding on to that trauma can be used towards making our lives incredible.
and so that's what I would say. Just like let it be open to a complete change. But to start with just like where you're at and like let it be okay, because those things they get, depending on the person, depending on what's going on. It's like you can start doing really, really small stuff and you can get ahead so fast.
Oh
It
yeah.
might take a little bit longer. You know what I mean? That's okay too. Just keep your eyes on, is it possible that I can change this and get myself into a really good space around it?
I love it. And what an excellent spot to stop our chat. Not that I want to, but being able to do that is the key to freedom. So thank you so much, Monty. I really appreciate you dropping in on this little world here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's like I'm so passionate. I mean, it's trauma. Dealing with trauma is not fun, but it's like it's fun to me in that I know, we're friends as well, so I know how far you've come. I know how far I've come. I know what other people that I've worked with. I know what's possible, and so it is fun, because
Well, it's
life
fun
can
to
be
have the
better.
work done, and it's
Yeah.
fun that when we do get that little hangover, fear bite, or specter sort of threatening the status quo, that we could be like, oh yeah, I used to live like that all the time. Not today. See ya.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, cheers, Lovey. Thank you for listening in on Monty Cox and me as we talk about the trauma.